Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett, and I am joined by Tammy Melchien. Tammy, how you doing?
Good, even though I really wish you would have changed your shirt since the last time we did this.
I know, but I didn't. And I really wish you had given me your scarf so that we could have done that magic trick. Yeah, it's true. We're filming back-to-back, so if you saw us last month looking like this, it's because we look like this. So let's talk a little bit about a brand new series that we've got coming up called Uncovered. And this is the series that immediately follows the One Initiative. And so actually when we originally mapped out the year's worth of content, the One Initiative was actually still not really a part of the conversation. And so the shift to include the One Initiative in that time frame kind of led us to some slightly different territory for the series that follows it. And so this series has some familiar stuff from what we planned when we planned a year's worth of content in May, but there are also some unique, some clear differences. So let's just start by talking a little bit about where this series is headed and why it's a good companion piece or kind of a after we've gone through the One Initiative kind of series.
Okay.
So talk a little bit about that, Tammy.
Yeah, we felt coming out of One Initiative, which is, pretty big challenge to people to step up, make a generosity commitment, that we thought like a good change of pace here would be to do something on spiritual disciplines. But not maybe necessarily like we're not doing the traditional prayer or Bible reading. We're looking at some forgotten disciplines, some forgotten spiritual practices is probably a better way to say it, that can help us deal with some of the harder things in our lives. I think is a way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Uncovered kind of speaks to this idea that, maybe these are some things that we don't often talk about or think about in these terms, but can be ways for us to really be empowered to live life as Jesus wanted us to.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk a little bit about that before we dive into the 3 weeks, because there is sort of this trying versus training principle that kind of weaves throughout all three of these spiritual practices.
Well, the theme verse is from 1 Timothy, where Paul says to Timothy, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for the present life and the life to come home. And the idea is like, we want to be like Jesus, but our efforts to try to be like Jesus often leave us failing.
Yes.
And the idea of spiritual practices are things that we can do, that as we do them, God empowers us, God transforms us to then be able to become and do things that we couldn't do just by direct effort. So that's why we're talking about, it's not about trying to be like Jesus, it's about training to be like Jesus. And that's why Paul says to Timothy, train yourself in godliness. And so we're going to look at some 3 practices in this series, the practice of solitude, the practice of confession, and the practice of hospitality, which are practices that can help, like maybe us grow to be the kind of people we desire to be that we can't just get to by direct effort.
So let's start with week 1 then. Solitude. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people like being alone. Some people don't. But why is this a spiritual practice?
Okay.
This notion, where does that come from?
Well, I think most people can relate with the feeling that life is a little chaotic, that life is cluttered. We long for some peace. We long for maybe clarity, like when you're trying to make an important decision and, you don't have time to even think. And so that is why I think we see Jesus demonstrate, model, live out the practice of solitude, this practice of getting away to spend time with his Father, spend time with God, in order to create the space for that peace to enter in, to create that space for clarity to come. And so we're going to talk about practicing solitude. And, the ironic thing about solitude is I feel like the busier we are, the less we feel like we have time for it.
Oh, I don't have time for that. Yeah, for
But
sure.
the busier you are, the more you need to make time for it.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
see how that works?
Yeah, you tricked
Yeah.
me. You tricked me.
So,
It is funny, though, because when I look at these passages and it describes what Jesus did, I mean, it's like you kind of do gloss over those details. It's like when he went to go pray, it's like Jesus got up while it was still dark, very early in the morning, left, went to a solitary place where he prayed. And then everybody's looking for him. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that I've looked at that passage a lot of times, but that part of it, like, I don't think to myself, I want to be more like Jesus. Like, for example, getting up early in the morning and going
spending
off.
time in solitude.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So why, I mean, and there are a truckload of instances
Yes.
in the New Testament where Jesus is doing exactly that, modeling this spiritual practice.
But my guess is you do look at Jesus, and when you read the stories about Jesus' life, you see Jesus as someone who wasn't, like, stressed, who wasn't
Right.
chaotic,
Yeah.
who wasn't, like, who didn't struggle with clarity. Those are the things you want to be.
Yeah, when put in stressful situations, Jesus did not lose his nut.
Yes.
He was able to deal.
He didn't fall under pressure of the moment.
Right.
He when something hard happened in his life, he didn't crumble under the hurt of the pain. I mean, those are the things that we want to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
And we might try, but we don't.
Sure.
But-
Or we just give up and say, oh, well, he was God. He could do
Yeah.
things that I can't do.
But what we see is Jesus was modeling for us, okay, here's the practice of solitude that empowered him
Yeah.
to find those places of peace, to find those moments of clarity. We look at one of the stories of when he went away was the night before he selected his 12 disciples. And so, you see that he's facing an important decision. What does he do? He creates space. He goes off and he's by himself in solitude, and he creates space for that clarity to come for him.
It'll be interesting to think, though, too, in terms of practical solutions. I mean, what are... And really, I mean, I haven't thought about this yet in terms of artistic brainstorm for the service itself, but, you don't necessarily want to go into modeling it in that moment necessarily. I don't think. Maybe.
Send everyone home.
Yeah, right, exactly. Everyone just please don't look at anyone just right now.
Just leave.
Just close your eyes and pretend you're all by yourself. Yeah, so it doesn't exactly follow. So you want to make sure that, we are kind of thinking in terms of like, okay, what are the practical ways I can begin training myself in this spiritual practice?
Yeah. Well, and one of the like, I think in some ways it's not clever, but the most important thing is solitude doesn't just happen. You have to plan for it. You have to schedule it. Whether that's, to think about maybe creating some moments for solitude every day. So that might be I'm going to get up 10 minutes earlier than I normally do, or I'm going to not look at my phone until I'm at work so that I spend that more, like things like that. How are you going to create some daily moments for solitude? But also, how are you going to potentially create some longer periods for solitude? One of the practices we do as a staff here, we call retreat days, where we're encouraged to take a day, it's marked on the calendar, that is intended to be a day that's really a day of solitude, a day to just be with God, to hear from God, to rest,
to reflect,
write, and all of that.
Yeah,
But none of that
rejuvenate.
happens either in a day, or none of that happens like in a extended period of time like that, unless we make the decision to put it on our calendar.
Right. Yeah. There's not a whole lot of in this environment that we choose to live in right now, the way we choose to live in it. We don't find ourselves caught in spontaneous moments of solitude.
No.
Necessarily.
No.
So yeah, no, that's good. That's a good note. Well, one thing we can definitely plan for leading up to week 2 is we're gonna set our clocks forward. Because week 2 of this series, we're going to confess that, I did not set my clock forward, and now I'm an hour late to church, and I'm a sinner.
I'm just going to be stuck in my sin now.
Right, yeah, you're just stuck. So, oh well. It is Time Change Weekend, but more importantly, we're talking about the second of our uncovered spiritual practices, and this one is confession. So what are we talking about here?
Okay, and this
This
one...
doesn't sound like fun.
Well, this is one I'm sure probably none of us really practice. I mean, when you talk about something that needs to be uncovered, but gosh, we don't practice it because we're afraid of it, but we don't practice it to the detriment of our own freedom and peace and life. And so, some of this we're gonna use the narrative of David and Nathan coming to confront him and that. But like David, it's always interesting to me that when you really step back and you go, okay, this guy committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had,
It's a soap opera.
Yeah, I mean, he had her husband killed on the front lines, all this stuff you look, but yet he's called a man after God's own heart, which is interesting. So it's kind of, it's not necessarily like our sinful choices, like there's still hope for us, I guess is what I'm saying in that.
Right, exactly.
But what you see is, in this instance, he's confronted by someone else with his sin. But when you look at several of the Psalms, and we're going to take a look at Psalm 32, Psalm 51, where you see what David learns through confession. And it always strikes me in I think it's Psalm 32, when he talks about, in verse 3, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day. And you think about that, like when you have royally screwed up and you're keeping it hidden and you're keeping it, I mean, it eats you alive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the thing is, we are so afraid to get real about that with God, to get real about that with other people. But when you do, what always happens. I mean, there's junk that has to be worked through, but eventually it's like you bring things into the light and they lose their power.
Right.
And the path to freedom, the path to being freed from this bondage of sin, comes through the spiritual practice of confession.
Well, and I think, it's a practice. It's something that you're training and you're constantly doing. I mean, part of the problem, I think, is that because we wall up and we it's like deny, we create such a lack of pattern. I mean, what would it actually look like to have a consistent, trained discipline of confession? Chances are that freedom would be considerably, more liberating, more consistently enjoyable. You're operating in a world where confessing your shortcomings is a habit, and figuring out what that looks like. I'm assuming that small group life will need to be addressed here in terms of like what it looks like to have compatriots, people you can count on.
And probably even, within that small group, maybe there's that one person, one or two people that you really have that level of, let's get honest with each other in it. And I always think, both from experience, but also just, a principle is, what we find is that too, when we confess, then like that sinful choice starts to lose its appeal, That can either be because we experience the freedom of it and we think, oh gosh, I never want to do that again. Or that can be because we experience hard consequences from it. But either way, I mean, again, if the goal is to stop making sinful choices, which obviously makes us more like Jesus for that way. If the goal is to stop making sinful choices, it's hard to just try and do that on your own. Yeah. But the practice of confession is something that can empower us to grow in that way.
No, that's good. And I think it's a link to where two or more are gathered. I'm there also. There is power in that community. And there is power for the enemy in isolation. So, yeah, that's good. All right. Well, I'm glad we fixed that.
All right.
So let's move on to week 3. It concludes our series, and this one is kind of a curveball, I think.
Yeah.
Hospitality. So how is hospitality a spiritual discipline that needs to be trained?
Yeah, and this was the original focus of the series. We wanted to focus on hospitality, so we still wanted to keep a week in here about this. And when I think about this, like in some ways, it's like I want to be, again, like Jesus, someone who really cares about other people.
Right.
But it can be so easy to just become centered on yourself and your life and what you got going on in that. But the practice of hospitality, of opening your life, opening your home opening your dining room table to other people. You know, when you intentionally practice something and invite these relationships into your life, you begin to care
Right.
about people, and your heart expands beyond just your own self-centered life. And so I think that's where the practice of hospitality can help us with that. But I think in this message, we'll probably end up taking a pretty pointed kind of challenge in it, in that one of the things, as we studied a little bit preparing for this, realized that pretty much all of the commands related to hospitality in the New Testament are talking about Christ follower to Christ follower. It's about, a big part of hospitality is about how we have this responsibility to be offering it to one another in the body of Christ. And, one of the things that makes me think about is how sometimes when we think about opening our homes to other people, we just think about our family,
Sure.
our closest friends, and all of that.
Right.
And, one of the passages we're going to look at here is where Jesus goes, who is my brother? Who is my mother? He wasn't saying that, family is not important.
Right.
But he was saying, I came to give you a bigger vision I came to broaden the definition of who your family is. And when you are my follower, your family is
Right.
all of these brothers and sisters who are walking alongside you, following me too. And so, we're going to challenge people to begin to think of that, of not to get so, just focused on your nuclear family or your, closest little circle of friends, but what
Right.
does it mean to offer hospitality? And I like this because it's the week before Easter. So I think one practical challenge could be, when you look out, who around you maybe needs a family,
Right.
needs to experience needs to be a part of that type of environment. It might be the single person that doesn't have anywhere to go for the holiday. It might be, it might be somebody who was recently widowed, somebody that was recently divorced. Could be the single mom who, doesn't have family around or anything
Right.
like that.
Right.
And, the last thing she wants to do is cook an Easter dinner.
Right.
So anyway, just to expand beyond and to look at the people even that are sitting around you in church that morning and saying, okay, if this is my family, and next week is a holiday, which is a time for a family to get together, who needs to be around my table this next week?
Right. Now that's a big challenge. It makes me wonder, what are you doing for Easter Sunday? What are you doing? Maybe you can come over.
I would love to.
All right. Well, that's good. All right. Well, I'm glad we worked that out. The whole time I'm thinking, hey, I should have Tammy over. That'd be good.
That'd be fun.
We'll really do it. No, it's good. Now there was in this just a little bit of a side note too, just challenging us. That there are some justice issues. There are some, it is definitely all of those things that we're describing. But for some of us, there may be even calls to step into some environments that aren't so comfortable, to really be a giver of hospitality to some people who, are in a different category than us.
Yeah, we could potentially, if we wanted to go hot topic with this, we could potentially address refugees. And one of the things that my small group has done for the last 5 years we've sponsored refugee families as they arrive from World Relief. And I can certainly tell you, it's not always comfortable.
Right.
But it certainly has grown my heart that it's been interesting to me how much I have cared about the current event stories about that.
Sure.
Because I've had refugee families around my
Right.
table.
Yeah, and that's the kind of training that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those are the things that help shape who we are,
Yeah.
for sure.
So we could address a hot topic. Another suggestion a member of our teaching team had is there's something called Safe Families, which it's an organization that tries to create a stopgap between when a family is in crisis and the social services. So rather than a kid immediately being placed into foster care, that, maybe there's a safe family that steps in and takes care of that child until the long-term solution with another family member or something like that.
Gotcha.
For example, some of the instances I've heard is, if a parent gets arrested,
Right.
what happens to that child, and so Safe Families is an organization that steps in. That's a way to offer hospitality, is to invite a child into your home to be part of your family, to take care of them. So anyway, we might explore some of those type of things too.
No, that's good. Well, I mean, I would say, these are three, really unique spiritual practice challenges, and I think it's going to be interesting to see in the landscape, someone who shows up to all three of these. What are the ways, what is the most immediate next step that someone's being challenged toward? It could be really, really cool, really interesting.
And it might be that in each one we have a small step, big step.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little solitude each day, block out a time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like, God's speaking to each of us kind of on our own and in community, and the small group, like you said, I mean, your small group may be rejuvenated about, we need to attack that. We need to go further.
Yeah.
Some people, it's going to be, what's my first step in inviting someone from my small group over to my house that I've never had at my house.
Yep.
And so creating the room and the space.
Yeah,
for
that last one could be, a small step is just having someone at your table. Bigger step is maybe to consider something like the refugee, like the Safe Family, that type of thing.
Right. No, I like that.
Even confession might be, even though, confess the little things and
then really get to the
but
serious
I mean,
stuff.
I think the confession one is going to have, it's also about confessing to God and confessing each other, and in some ways, I feel like sometimes confessing to God is a lot easier than confessing to others.
Yeah, well, as a practice for sure.
So maybe there's a start there, but anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, I think it's going to be a great series, and I'm really looking forward to it. And like you said, it gets us right up to Easter, and so that's exciting that we're working on this now. So we make it something awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. We look forward to all sorts of awesome brainstorms as a result of this creative content, and we look forward to seeing what all of our campuses are going to create to experience life change. So for Tammy Melchien, I'm Eric Bramlett, and thanks again for being a part of the Big Idea podcast. So long, everybody.